unless your knowledge is fully productized, which I don't think many people have gotten to this point yet. But that knowledge is still applied under a time vector, and that's what makes time what we call the most important resource.
Welcome to the Agency Profit Podcast, a show dedicated to going deep space on agency operations, which is just as nerdy as it sounds. I'm your host, Marcel Petitpoff. I'm the CEO of Parakeeto, a firm that helps digital and creative agencies measure and improve their profitability. Join me as I interview some of the smartest thought leaders and agency owners in our space and go deep into operations, metrics, and all the other things you need to get right so you can spend less time worrying about operations and more time executing on your vision. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Agency Profit Podcast. I'm pleased today to be joined by Ilia Markov. He leads up marketing at a company you might have heard of before if you're in the agency or consulting industry called TOGGL. Of course, they're very well known for their time tracking software, but they also have planning and hiring software. And what's interesting about TOGGL is they're used by over 70,000 teams across the world. I was on your website just recently and I saw that like 67,000 people signed up for TOGGL last week. So the scale, some of the biggest organizations in the world have teams using TOGGL. So I'm really fascinated to have a conversation about what has been a hot topic as of late, time tracking, do's and don'ts. Is it good? Is it bad? How is it changing? From the perspective of someone that is seeing it at such a massive scale and one of the leading companies in the space. So with all of that, Ilia, thanks so much for joining us today.
And thanks for having me, Marcel. I'm really glad to be here.
Well, we have had the opportunity to work together with content on a couple of different platforms, and you were gracious enough to have me come in and do some content with TOGGL as part of the agency academy and resources that you're putting together there. So we've had a chance to kind of shoot the shit about time tracking and share our perspectives. So I'm really excited to bring that to the episode today. But before I get into all of this, I want to give you an opportunity in your own words to explain what TOGGL does for anyone that somehow has not heard of you.
So TOGGL, as you described very well, TOGGL is a suite of tools. We're very well known for our time tracking software used by, as you said, like thousands of teams and individuals of all sizes. We also have the Plan, which is a project management / resource and capacity management tools, also a good fit for service organizations. And then we also have another tool called TOGGL Hire, which helps teams and companies in different areas to hire the best talent. But above all, TOGGL is a group of people who are dedicated to helping what we call knowledge service businesses be successful wherever they are, however big they are in terms of the team size, whether it's solos or companies of thousands of people, and be successful with what they have, their knowledge and their time at the end of the day.
And so what's interesting about TOGGL, the company's been around since early 2000s, if I'm not mistaken.
2007, I believe. I keep forgetting the exact year, but the last big recession was like one of the big precipices that kind of spurred the creation of TOGGL.
Yeah. So the company's been around for a while, obviously not since before time tracking started. That's probably an age-old practice that goes back thousands of years. But in the modern light, been around for, I think, a big sea change in terms of how time tracking is being used and how it's being perceived, especially in professional services and agencies. So I'd love to chat, because this is something we can go back and forth on for a while, about your perspective on what's changed about time tracking, both in terms of how it's being used and how it's being viewed in our space over the last couple of decades.
So one thing that we definitely see a lot of is nowadays very few companies, very few organizations, even very few individuals, freelancers, charge for their time by the hour. So we see, the proliferation of pricing models such as project-based, even value-based pricing a lot more. However, what this doesn't change is, in our view at least, is the necessity to understand where your most valuable resource is going. Because at the end of the day, yes, we talk about knowledge work and providing a service on the base of that knowledge, but that's not done unless your knowledge is fully productized, which I don't think many people have gotten to this point yet. But that knowledge is still applied under a time vector, and that's what makes time uh, what we call the most important resource.
Yeah, yeah, and I would agree. Like our perspective at Parakeeto on this is that you're like any industry, we're seeing increased pressure on margins in consulting and professional services, and I think that's a result of two forces. The first is the squeezing of essentially the leverage on labor, which I think is ultimately a really good thing. People work fewer hours than they used to. It used to be pretty common if you worked at a consulting firm, you kind of expected to not have a life and you expected to not get paid very well, and your evenings and weekends were largely subsidizing overruns on projects and mismanagement of scope and those kinds of things. That's not the case anymore. So it's great for the teams that are working in the business, but of course, it's harder for the business to be profitable and to have good margins when essentially the labor that they're getting from their team is half of what it used to be, but is now thankfully actually what they're contractually getting when they hire somebody. And on the flip side, of course, increased competition, the globalization of competition, which was really pushed forward by COVID. So we're now competing globally as opposed to locally. And the response to your point, from our point of view, has been two things: specialization, more focus from most of these firms, doing fewer things for fewer clients and going deeper into that, which creates both the ability for them to charge premium rates as well as find efficiency and regular process on the back end, and the proliferation of these more advanced pricing models. So generally, because the firms are more specialized, they're taking on more risk, flat rates, project-based rates, retainers that are flat, all that kind of stuff. And the mistake I see so many people make is they think, well, because we're not charging by the hour, that means that we don't have to track this time, right? Because time
Yeah.
used to be seen as this thing that you tracked for the client. But the shift now is, well, now that's something you're tracking for yourself, because to your point, you need to understand where the largest cost in the firm, which is going to be anywhere from 50 to 65% of your costs, are going. It's your people and where their time is going. And to your point, even if we're charging purely on value, the revenue capacity of the business still comes down to how much time we have available to us to deploy against those kind of value-based contracts. So the way in which it's being used has shifted, but what I'm finding is there's still a lot of negative sentiment towards time tracking, especially from people who had the misfortune of working in consulting and agencies a
Mhm.
decade ago, back when the culture around time tracking was different, that are now being projected onto time tracking now, and a lot of misunderstandings. I'd love to unpack like what is some of the pushback or some of the grievances that you hear a lot from people when you start talking about time tracking in this industry.
Absolutely, it's something we hear a lot even from customers we speak to. Very often, uh, our sales team would start a conversation with a new potential customer, and they'll say something like, "I would love to have time tracking for the clarity and transparency it will give me, but I just don't know how to introduce to my team. I feel very uncomfortable doing that." Um, me being a TOGGL, it's actually, for me, it's very easy to talk about this because our whole company ethos is around the idea that time tracking is not a tool that you can use for surveillance or micromanagement. TOGGL, the way it's built, makes it a very bad fit for that. There's literally no way to monitor your employees using TOGGL. We don't take screenshots or any of those made up activity metrics that you see in some other tools. And like, I'm not even speaking about some of the spookier things that I've heard about, like using the webcam to kind of take pictures of the person and so on. Um, for two reasons. First, the ethical one. It's just bad practice, bad business. We don't really want to encourage this in any formal sense. And the second one, which is probably even more important. Well, I don't know if it's more important, but from the business point of view, it's probably more important in the sense that this type of monitoring just doesn't work. I mean, if you're lucky enough to grow your company, what are you going to do? Like, you're not going to be able to check the screenshots of 1,000 people. Are you going to hire another 1,000 people to just police everyone else? How is that going to work? It's just not a fair. It's not a productive business practice. Let me put it that way. So we try to be very clear about that from the get go. If we have people coming to talk to us about that use for time tracking, we usually just point them in the direction of a competitor who might be a better fit for them. We still see that even with that these limitations within the software, some owners, managers try to use time tracking as a management or micromanagement tool. But again, it's something that doesn't scale very well.
Hey, it's Marcel here, and I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. If you are, then I want to encourage you to check out the Agency Profitability Toolkit. It's a free set of resources that we've put together to help agency owners just like you improve their profitability. It's full of free checklists, templates, and training videos, and has helped thousands of agencies get better at measuring the essentials of their business. So if you want to grab a free copy of that, you can head to parakeeto.com/toolkit or look for a link wherever you're watching or listening to this. With that, I want to thank you again for tuning in, and I'll let you get back to the episode. Yeah. Yeah, I think what you've described is aligned with kind of what we see as well. And what's interesting about this is, you talk about surveillance and the negative effects that it has on a lot of these things. What's interesting to me is the ultimate level, of course, with time tracking data is that you're closing the loop in that the people that are submitting the timesheets are then going to have that data reflected back to them, and you're going to recruit them into a conversation about what can we learn from this, right? But that is the feedback loop that's missing in so many firms, where the only people looking at this stuff are the owners or the management team. And because that feedback loop isn't there, because the team isn't privy to how the information is being used, they'll often come up with their own story in their mind about how it's being used without having been given that clarity. And that story is usually one of surveillance. Whether that's happening or not, it usually comes down to it's surveillance, it's productivity. They're trying to see if I'm working a lot. I'm going to make it seem like I'm working 40 hours a week, even though I'm not. I'm going to make it seem like it took me 4 hours to do this task, even though it only took me 2. When you get into these kinds of dynamics, when you start seeing this kind of stuff in your time tracking data, it should be a really clear sign that, hey, the way in which we're communicating about this and the level at which we're involving our team is not adequate. However, I find that the blocker that most teams have to closing that feedback loop and getting the information back in front of their team is they don't have enough confidence in their ability to understand and model the data. And so, of course, they're hesitant to then open it up, because if they do that, then they're going to expose all of their, the flaws in their thinking or their misunderstanding. So what are some of the keys to getting the right implementation and building that level of confidence so that you can then actually open this up and turn it into fuel for productive conversations and buy-in and all the good things that can come from having transparency around this data?
Mm-hmm. Uh, we like to talk about several principles when it comes to time tracking. First of all, we believe everyone should do it. Everyone on the team, kind of to build the habit and instill the behavior and still make it part of the culture, sort of thing. Then introduce it to the team, explain what the benefit is to everyone, and then you have to kind of show how that benefits every member of the team. So go and have conversations about in a very non-aggressive way, if you like. Go and have the conversations about um, you like, we expect you to clock in 30 hours maybe a week, but you've actually been clocking more, so we need to figure out how to get you to those 30 hours so you're not working too much. So have these beneficial conversations which show every member of the team how the data they're generating is actually used to help them out, not just to kind of. Another one is make sure time tracking is not just something that, we introduce it, we teach everyone how to do it, we make it part of the employee handbook. So whenever someone new joins, they kind of read the paragraph on how to do time tracking. But actually, keep the education ongoing and also keep improving how you're doing it. So maybe ideas will come from your team on how to improve that. But above all, I think what really helps use time tracking productively is just adding as much context to your data. So not just tracking hours, that can be done with pen and paper or a spreadsheet, but add as much contextual data as possible to every time entry that you have. So who is this done for, client? What project is this for? Um, in TOGGL track you can add tags, so you can say this is development work, or this is debugging work, or this is marketing work, and so on. Just as an example that I can give from someone who's actually on the TOGGL team right now, who used to work for a big agency, because of the way they were doing time tracking, it was just a simple um, timesheet. Even though she was doing um, repetitive project, so similar project for different clients, she always had a very hard time giving an accurate quote when a new client approached the agency, because the time tracking data she was generating in that timesheet lacked this context I was talking about.
Mm. Yeah, and I'll add a couple of notes to this in that I think, you mentioned a couple of things that are obviously really important. In structure, I think one of the things for everyone to consider if you're listening to this that we see a lot of teams get caught up in is separating structured from unstructured data in terms of how you set up that schema. So a lot of that metadata is great and you can get it onto a time entry with very low cost. This can be in the form of notes. It can be in the form of notes that are automatically appended to a time entry via some kind of an integration with your project management tool. So you can leverage a lot of the complex, rich information that's sitting outside of the time tracking tool. You might use a task ID and then you can look that information up later. But what is often going to actually work against you is trying to create really, really tight structure around all of that metadata. So, like if you're trying to enforce a convention that's like 6 different parameters long in terms of how people have to log notes, like it's going to be impossible to maintain. That structure is not going to be maintained. All the systems that rely on that structure are going to break, and your time tracking compliance is going to go down. So, I think in terms of structured data, keep that really small and keep it deliberate and keep those buckets really, really clear and concise. And then look to get all that additional metadata in more of an unstructured way so that you can really balance like the ability to go and get specific insights in a moment in time versus creating all this operational drag that actually ends up making time tracking harder than it needs to be for everyone. But that structure, I think, is really a critical component that you mentioned, Ilia. So we've talked a little bit about the change in terms of how time tracking data is seen. We've talked about TOGGL's philosophy as it relates to really kind of being anti-surveillance and looking to be more elevated in your position on how you view time tracking. And I want to note that this isn't just like positioning, although it is important for positioning in such a competitive market to be clear about who you are for and who you're not for. But there's a whole page dedicated to this on the website that I'll link in the show notes because I think it's pretty fascinating. You're very, very clear about
Mm-hmm.
why you don't believe in this practice, and we've talked about some of the best practices for scaling up that ascension model, elevating our usage of time tracking, getting the right implementation in. One of the things I'm really interested to talk to you about, because again, you have so much perspective, is where you see time tracking going over the next couple of decades. Obviously, there's some exciting new technologies emerging. What's your take on where we're headed with this?
Yeah. Um, Obviously, AI is the elephant in the room that we have to talk about. I One very obvious implementation of that when it comes to time tracking is just making that process fully automated. And
Mm-hmm.
it's actually one of the biggest hurdles now to developing the habit that we see with people. Like, I mean, I definitely drink the Kool-Aid, but even I don't wake up feeling excited to track my time for the day. So making improvements in that area can definitely help, and it will also help from the point of view of being it making it much easier to get to this level of clarity where data is generated automatically, and then you can kind of get
Yeah.
the insights from that data.
Yeah.
However, the way we see it at TOGGL, we believe there are two other big areas where time tracking is going and where we can make an impact and make the experience even better. One is the exactly this level of insight and what we do with the data, how we analyze it, how we understand it, and how we apply it to make um, decisions about the business and improve our businesses. That's one area, and the other one is something that I kind of touched upon, but using uh, again that data generated to kind of get to a level where you're proactive in what you need to do. So being able to hire before you are pressed by all the work that you have to all the client work that you have to do, or kind of getting a early warning signal that it's time to start generating new business because you're about to kind of wrap it up with a few clients, or you might lose someone. So
Mm.
these are three specific areas where I think the market for time tracking is exciting.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm going to say things that you're probably not allowed to say that are more specific in terms of like how I imagine this stuff will
Mhm.
work, because I don't have any implications into your roadmap. But I agree. I think that's the progression. The first order of business has to be compliance, because time tracking data is really only as useful as it is complete. And there's so much opportunity to improve compliance, or I should say, remove friction from time tracking.
Mhm.
But I think what's going to be interesting, to your point earlier, is the data privacy surveillance kind of aspects to this, because so much of this will be you as the user opting into having what you're doing monitored. And I think it's going to be important for companies. And I would imagine that, of all the different ways of doing this, TOGGL will likely be, based on the philosophies you've had so far, one of the companies that allows an employee to store that information locally in an encrypted way, and not have it be, pushed out to their employer, to, not have that data sold off to people, and all of these data management practices that I think the more we allow monitoring of what we're doing to then be turned into time tracking data, or to be appended to a time entry, we're going to need to have pretty tight controls at the user level in terms of like transparency on how that information is being shared. But I think the opportunity to enrich time entries and to help remove friction from time tracking is massive with AI. And to your point, also um, inferring and getting value out of that information is going to be huge. The one thing that I think a lot of people are overlooking is how important the structure of the data is going to be to getting those insights. Because even now, in training AI models, so much of the cost and time goes into creating structured data sets to train these models on. So that's something that is still going to be important. And I think the earlier you get on top of your data structure, the more likely it'll be that you'll be able to get value out of those kinds of features and functionality in the future, when, instead of a reporting environment inside of a tool like TOGGL, there's a chatbot and you just ask it a question like, hey, how many people worked overtime in the last 6 weeks? And it just tells you, well, there needs to be a certain amount of structure for an AI to be able to go in, make that inference, and give you that information. So the better structured your data is, the more value you'll be able to get historically, as those kinds of engines are tied into your data set. So I think it's really exciting. To your point, Ilya, I'm really hopeful for where all of this is going to take us.
Yes, me too. I'm very excited as well, and as I said, I think it's like lots of very interesting things coming up in the industry.
So, with all of that, we've had a great conversation. Where can people go and find more information about you and what you're doing at TOGGL?
So TOGGL is just toggle.com. It's spelled TOGGL, so without the e at the end. It's fairly easy to find us there. Me, probably the best place is by just typing my name in LinkedIn or Twitter. And if you have any questions or just want to geek out about time tracking, I'm always happy and excited to talk about it.
Awesome. So, with that, we'll have links in the show notes to TOGGL's website, to their statement on anti surveillance, and links to your LinkedIn and Twitter, Ilya. And for everyone listening at home, thanks for tuning in. And we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you very much, Marcel. Great to be here.